Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. This is not bad. I should do this more often. Why is this not my setup? Concept here is libido gaps. Because that's a weird subject. Okay, new take. Cut this. Cut to here. Libido gaps. So, I think at this point, on, let's say, the political left, maybe the cultural left might be a more specific word to use, asexuality has become more well-known, more widely accepted as one of the sexual orientations a person can be. We've come to accept that there are just some people out there who don't get horny, or I don't know if that's fully accurate, but they're asexual. They probably don't get horny. Most of them, not all. It's like a broad coalition, asexuality. There's also other terms like gray sexual or demisexual, which sort of lean in the direction of asexuality. They're not completely asexual, but they're just less interested in sex than maybe the average person would be. Once that has been established, I feel that it's weird, but not at all surprising to me, really, that we haven't built up cultural acceptance for the opposite of that. Right? We haven't really built up as much cultural acceptance for what you might call hypersexuality. In fact, if you search hypersexuality, the main thing that comes up right now is like women who have been assaulted and as a result of their trauma develop something along the lines of a sex addiction as a trauma response, which, generally speaking, if your sexual orientation or whatever about your sexuality is being medically termed as necessarily being a response to some kind of trauma, that implies a lack of social acceptance, generally speaking, right? Because they're like, try to figure out what went wrong with you in your life to make you this way. If ever there were a hypersexual, and you're looking at him, you're looking at the guy, yeah, very, very sex-focused, touch-focused, at least, from a fairly young age. I remember being like 11 years old and being like, God, when will this sexlessness end? When will this sexlessness end? You got a long way to go, buddy. 11 would have been a weird time to start looking back, actually. But, yeah. So, it's difficult to build up empathy for people who are outside of your sort of life experience, just in general, right? Like, that's usually the case, is that people try to put themselves in other people's shoes, and they take a little bit too much of themselves in when they do that. And so if somebody really is just different from you, like on a fundamental level, that's hard for people to understand, because they try to understand other people through understanding how they could get there, right? Like, mentally. So if somebody is asexual, I think a lot of people probably try to figure out how they would get to asexuality, and it probably, if you're a normal amount of sexual as a person, involves like prudishness, right? Or like Christian morality, some kind of a false negative bias against sex has entered into your brain, and you just believe sex is like bad or harmful for one reason or another. Whereas if you're talking about like hypersexuality, then to try and understand that, you might think, oh, they're a slut, they're a man slut, they're a fuckboy, they're a degenerate or something, right? Clearly something went wrong, one way or another, and this person's self-understanding of sex has been warped outside of the normal understanding. So what's the normal understanding, right? Let's talk about the normal understanding. I suppose the normal understanding is that you do it on a third date. Yeah, I guess that's about right. Yeah, I guess that's about the normal understanding. You do it on a third date. You do it on the first date, you're weird. You do it with strangers, disgusting. You wait till marriage? What's wrong with you? Waiting until marriage? What are you, a Christian? Gross. Gross. Icky Christians. I remember there was an episode of The Venture Bros, where they had this guy who was like super sweet, it seemed like to me originally, and like romantic, and like wanted to wait until marriage. And he had this girlfriend, and she didn't want to wait until marriage, and she was clearly annoyed by his wanting to wait until marriage, but he like really believed in it. And he seemed like a sweet guy. And then the main characters of the show slept with his wife, and like ruined his whole life, and the show treated it as like, haha, fuck you, that's what you get for being religious, was like the tone. The tone was like, how dare you want to wait until marriage, you deserve to have your wife cheat on you. Seemed a bit harsh to me. So, yeah, there's like an empathy that in order to build that empathy, there's a type of empathy that you only get from a recognition of innate difference. And I think we have, to quote a fascist, Alain de Boton, an ideology of sameness to some extent in the modern day. We believe a lot of times in what Steven Pinker would term blank slateism. And we try to view people as like a blank slate, and that can be harmful even within like a left-wing framework, because then you don't understand innate differences between people, and that can make it harder to empathize with people who are different than you, right? So like, if somebody's asexual, knowing that that is a thing, that is like a biologically innate thing that they are, and that it's not a mentality that they have, and that you can't like talk them out of it, is kind of necessary for you to actually understand it. Because otherwise, maybe you date somebody asexual and you try to change them. You try to convince them that they have like a broken mentality towards sex, and that if you just talk to them long enough, then they'll start to want it. And I imagine a lot of asexual people find that frustrating, right? You can also find that frustrating on the other end, right? Ending up in a lot of dynamics with people who do not understand why you want so much sex. Well, why do you want so much? That can be difficult in a relationship. And so there are actually even relationship guides, like marriage counselors and stuff, write relationship guides for libido gaps, where one partner wants more sex than the other partner. That can be like a big tension in relationships, because the person who wants more sex oftentimes feels unwanted, when that's not necessarily the case. Like, it could entirely be the case that the person just isn't interested in sex as often, and it's not that they're like not attracted to you because you're ugly or something, you know? So that's like a necessary understanding to build. I've tricked you again. Surprise. This is a video about men and women. This is a men and women video. I've given up on arguing men and women have evolutionary psychological differences on the internet, so I'm not going to bother with that. So for the moment, we're just going to assume that either men as a group are different from women as a group because they've been socialized that way, or maybe it's an innate characteristic. Who knows? I don't know. Either way, men as a group seem to tend to be more on the hypersexual side, right? Like, culturally, we have all these ideas of like men as dogs and pigs, men as being very crass and interested only in sex. All men care about is sex, right? Women as a group tend to be a bit more disinterested in it. Like, maybe they see, like, they're not chaste 100%. Like, obviously for our species to exist, at some point women have to become interested in sex at some point. So clearly they're not utterly disinterested, but it does seem to be the case that in most sexual matters they're on the low side of the libido gap, right? So what happens when your entire culture, your entire gender relations lack that same type of difference-based empathy that I just described before that drives a lot of libido gaps? What happens when an entire society starts to not understand that men and women are different? What happens when an entire society starts to view men and women as basically the same except for the ideas in their head? Well, I'll tell you what happens. You get a bunch of men trying to convince women that they're just being too prudish about sex, that they're being too asexual, that they just need to change how they think about it, trying to talk them into being men. And you get a bunch of women trying to convince men to stop being so horny all the time, to stop focusing so much about sex. Why do you have to be so shallow? Why do you have to be so disinterested in the romantic components? Aren't you a full-blooded human being? And this goes into other conversations too. Like, there's this famous journal article that came out at one point about incels that said incels are only interested in love. Secretly they just want love. It's not really about sex deep down, because it's necessary to psychoanalyze people and make it not about sex. Why can't it be about sex? Why would that be so terrible? If there was a movement of people that felt deprived of sex, so you're allowed to feel deprived of love, but not of sex. That's what we've decided as a society. Men and women alike are capable of feeling deprived of sex. So there's this sort of deep society-wide libido gap, causing a society-wide relationship struggle. And we really need a marriage counselor. We really need a marriage counselor to sit us all down and say, hey, maybe it's not that he's a shallow, objectifying piece of shit and she's a callous prude who thinks you're ugly and doesn't like you because you're ugly. Maybe it's that you just think about sex fundamentally different ways. And that's sort of my last talking point, I guess, is that a lot of men end up feeling insecure in the same way that I described the partner who wants more sex in a libido gap relationship feeling insecure. A lot of men end up feeling like, oh, women don't want me because I'm ugly. Women only want hot guys. When it's entirely possible that there is just a general disinterest. There's just a broader, more general disinterest in you, which would actually be a healing knowledge, right? That could be a healing knowledge. For me, it's been sort of a healing knowledge of oh, women don't think I'm disgusting. They just kind of need to get to know me more before that sexual part of them gets activated. It's not that I'm fundamentally ugly. It's that, they just aren't there right away the same way I am, And that creates a bit of a tension within me as well. Because on a personal note, I think what I want deep down is something I probably can't have societally. What I want is to be wanted the way I want. I want to be wanted the way that I want women. I want a girl to see me in a grocery store and go, damn. I want a damn as I walk by. I want an immediate physical attraction. I don't want to be wanted for my personality. Who gives a fuck about my personality? I talk about weird shit on the internet. I don't have a personality. That's not true. I have, if anything, too much personality. I don't want to be wanted for who I am inside. That might sound shallow, I guess, or reverse shallow, I don't know. I don't want to be wanted for who I am inside. I want to be immediately valuable for my physical appearance. That's the kind of being wanted that I want. And I think sometimes it's difficult for women that I've talked to understand that desire, to understand the desire to be wanted, because sometimes there's like this pity. There's this pity for if a man talks about being lonely, right? They'll be like, oh, don't worry, you're a great person. Someone will date you one day just because of that. You're gonna find someone who gets along with you really well, and you're gonna fall in love, and it's all gonna be great. It's like, that's not really what the lonely guy wants to hear. The lonely guy wants to hear is, I'd fuck you. That's what he wants to hear. He wants to hear you're hot shit. That you're fuckable. That should be a pin. Make that a pin. Don't worry. You're fuckable. Don't be insecure. You look plenty fuckable to me. Okay, yeah, that's a good note to end on.